$500. That's what America's most trusted tool brand cost in 1927. 90 years later, it sold for $900 million, and in all that time, the company that owned it never made a single tool. Stay with me, because this gets so much worse. Start in the 1980s. All across America, grown men were digging through junkyards and trash cans. Not for copper, not for anything valuable, they were looking for broken wrenches. Because if the wrench said Craftsman on the side, you could carry that rusted, snapped piece of steel into any Sears in the country, hand it to a clerk, and walk out with a brand new one. No receipt, no questions. Forever. That promise built the most trusted tool brand in American history, a brand worth $900 million. And here's the part almost nobody knows. The company behind Craftsman never made a single tool. Not one wrench, not one socket, not in 90 years. This is the story of a $500 name that conquered every garage in America, and how the people who owned it liquidated 90 years of trust, one decision at a time. To understand Craftsman, you have to understand what Sears actually was. By 1908, the Sears catalog was over 1,000 pages thick. It sold houses, it sold pianos, and on a few crowded pages, it sold tools, 138 of them at 8 cents a piece. Sears was already America's tool store, it just didn't have a name for it. That changed in 1927 thanks to a hardware department manager named Arthur Barrows. Barrows wanted a brand, something that sounded like skill, like pride, like a man who knew what he was doing on a Saturday morning. A small company called Marion Craftsman Tool Company happened to own a word he liked. So Sears bought it. The name, just the name, for $500. That's about $9,000 in today's money. It would turn out to be one of the greatest returns on investment in the history of American business. At least, that's the story Sears always told. The genius move came next, and it wasn't Barrows's. A man named Tom Dunlap took over the hardware department and made a bet. The automobile was about to put a toolbox in every American garage. Dunlap threw out the cheap cast iron junk and demanded alloy steel. And then he did something his own boss openly mocked. He put chrome plating on wrenches headed for grease pits. Chrome on work tools. It was vanity. It was marketing. It was also irresistible. Sales rose sixfold in a single year. Dunlap had discovered the formula that would define Craftsman for 9 decades. The tool is steel, but the brand is a feeling. And no feeling sold harder than the guarantee. From 1927, every Craftsman hand tool carried a promise unheard of in retail. If it ever breaks, ever, we replace it, free, forever. Here's the beautiful trick hiding inside that promise, and it's the key to this entire story. Sears wasn't paying for it. Because Sears didn't make the tools. Companies you've never heard of made the tools, and Sears' buying power forced them to make the steel good enough that the promise rarely came due. The warranty was marketing genius written in someone else's metal. Analysts would later estimate the whole legendary program cost about $5 million a year. For the trust of a nation, that's not a cost. That's a rounding error. So who actually made Craftsman? For the golden era, the answer was mostly one company. Moore-Drop Forging of Springfield, Massachusetts. From 1938, their tools carried a tiny stamped code, an equal sign, a V, an equal sign. To most people, it meant nothing. To collectors today, that little mark is a holy symbol. After the war, the formula met its moment. Suburbia, 50 million garages, fathers and sons, and Saturday mornings. The Craftsman Toolbox became a rite of passage. Your first set at 12, handed over with the keys to a broken motorcycle and a single instruction. Figure it out. Flip through the catalogs of the 50s and 60s and you can feel it. Page after page of gleaming chrome, torque specs, roll cabinets like treasure chests. These weren't just tools. This was the hardware of American self-reliance. And it worked on a scale that's almost impossible to believe now. By 1969, Sears' sales equaled 1% of the entire United States economy. 2 out of 3 Americans shopped at Sears every quarter. Half of American households carried a Sears credit card. When Sears built its headquarters, it built the tallest building on Earth. And here's the paradox at the heart of the Golden Age. The branding operation produced genuinely great tools. Not because Sears was a great manufacturer, it wasn't a manufacturer at all, but because Sears' colossal buying power disciplined the best forges in America. Moore-Drop Forging on the ratchets, Western Forge in Colorado hammering out screwdrivers. Quality wasn't Sears' craft, it was Sears' leverage. By the 90s, the name was so strong it carried a NASCAR series on its shoulders. The Craftsman Truck Series, launched in 1995, the brand had escaped the toolbox entirely. It was culture now, which meant it could be worth billions, which meant sooner or later, someone would ask a dangerous question. If the brand is this valuable, why do we need the rest of the company? The unraveling didn't start with tools, it started with spreadsheets. In 2005, hedge fund manager Eddie Lampert merged Sears with Kmart, $11 billion. 2 dying giants strapped together and called a strategy. Sears would never grow its revenue again, not for a single year. And then, in 2006, came the move that tells you everything. Lampert took Sears' 3 crown jewel brands, Kenmore, Die Hard, and Craftsman, and transferred them into a separate legal entity called KCDIP. Then he issued $1.8 billion in bonds against those names and parked the bonds inside Sears' own insurance subsidiary in Bermuda. Follow what that means. Sears now paid royalties to use its own brand. Craftsman had stopped being a promise to customers. It was collateral now. The brand was mortgaged a full decade before it was ever sold. Down at store level, the promise was quietly rotting. Clerks started rejecting rusty tools. Then came daily limits. Then, in 2012, the unthinkable, in writing. Whole categories cut from forever to 25 years. With a receipt. The warranty that was built on never asking questions started asking questions. The steel changed too. In 2008, the marketing still bragged that every socket was proudly made in the USA. By 2010, imports were slipping into the bins. By 2013, the American-made hand tools had been swapped for lookalikes from overseas. Same shape, same logo, different sole. Collectors watched it happen in real time and gave it a name, the switcheroo. And then Sears did what everyone knew was coming. In January 2017, it sold Craftsman to Stanley Black & Decker. $525 million upfront, $250 more in year 3, royalties on top, call it $900 million, for a name. There were no factories to hand over. There had never been any factories. But look closer at that deal, because it's stranger than it sounds. Craftsman was doing $1.9 billion a year in sales, and 90% of it flowed through Sears' own collapsing stores. Stanley didn't get that business. Couldn't get it. They paid $900 million for the 10%, and the myth. 18 months later, October 2018, Sears filed for bankruptcy. Over 2,000 stores gone. Lampert's own company would later be sued by Sears' creditors for stripping billions in assets. The house that sold America its tools had been taken apart and sold for parts, and Craftsman was just the shiniest part. Stanley Black & Decker had a plan, and on paper it was a good one. Relaunch at Lowe's, 1,200 new products, $1 billion in sales by 2021, and the emotional centerpiece. Bring manufacturing home, Craftsman, made in America, again, or for the first time, depending on how honest you're being. In 2019, they announced it. A $90 million factory in Fort Worth, Texas, 425,000 square feet, 500 jobs. Robots and automation would beat overseas labor costs and forge ratchets on American soil once more. It never worked. The automation was scaled up before it was proven. Presses deformed the ratchets. Sockets came out of heat treatment misshapen, some missing the Craftsman stamp entirely. The plant limped along at half capacity, and in March 2023, it closed. Of the 500 promised jobs, about 175 people were left to hear the news. The reshoring showcase had proven this film's whole thesis by accident. The people who own this brand, old owners, new owners, are marketers. They have never been tool makers. The real tool makers, meanwhile, were dying quietly. Western Forge, the Colorado shop that had hammered Craftsman screwdrivers since the 1960s, closed in 2020 after 54 years. 164 workers, the WF stamp on a screwdriver shank is a tombstone now. And in case you think the lesson was learned, in 2021, Stanley launched a premium line, the V-Series. Independent testers put its wrenches up against Snap-on, tools costing 5 times as much, and the Craftsman won. It was the best steel to wear the name in decades. Stanley discontinued it in 2025. The exact playbook Sears ran in 2012, recycled by the new owner. Some habits, it turns out, come with the trademark. So where does that leave Craftsman today? It's fine. Genuinely, it's fine. A fair value, mid-shelf brand at Lowe's. Mostly imported, decent quality, honest prices. But walk through an estate sale some weekend. Find the beaten toolbox with the old ratchets from 1965. Watch what people pay for them. Because the only Craftsman anyone still worships was made by companies whose names were never on the tool. The brand was always a story, a $500 word that meant, someone stands behind this. For 90 years, someone did. The tragedy isn't that the story was fake, it's that it was true, until the people who owned it realized trust could be spent like money. They inherited a lifetime warranty, and they cashed it out. If this story hit home, the next one goes deeper. The tool empire that Craftsman's collapse left standing, and the dealer truck cult of Snap-on. Subscribe, and bring your father's toolbox.